Alrighty, yes, thank you all very much for coming along. Pretty big crowd today, but thankfully there's a good amount of familiar faces. And yes, so this is Hackers with Radios, Security, and the Physical Layer. So, the plan for today is I'll start by talking about some basic radio comms theory. Then from there we'll look at specific attacks, and what sort of equipment can we use to carry out these attacks. And also, I don't complain about a problem without proposing a solution, so we will be looking at some mitigation strategies. Now, really, who am I and why should you care? Well, as you've heard, I'm a PhD student with Queen's University Belfast's Centre for Secure Information Technologies. I'm just going into my second year there, and my project is the security of 6G open radio access networks. In terms of my interest in this area, I got pretty interested in radio communications off the back of some classes I did during my undergraduate degree. From there, I got some relevant work experience, and I combined that with a sort of curiosity about security for hardware, and this sort of grew out of that. Now, fun fact, I'm also involved with the Queen's Robotics Society. This is our BattleBot. He's called John. If you haven't checked out the Hacker BattleBots stall upstairs, please do check it out. It's tons of fun. I'm sure they'll be getting the destructive bots out this afternoon. But moving on from that, before we talk about hacking, I do need to bring up the Computer Misuse Act. Now, I'm sure that most of us have come across this about 100 times by now, but the gist of it is you can't gain unauthorized access to other people's computers. Punishments include prison time and fines, so don't get on the wrong side of this. But when we talk about radio hacking, we also need to consider using the spectrum responsibly. Now, the radio spectrum is governed by an organization called Ofcom, and they essentially define what frequency bands that you need a license to transmit on, how much power you can transmit on these frequency bands with, and how often you can transmit on them. If you get on the wrong side of them, they can send you a fixed penalty notice, take you to court for a fine or even prison time. So really, don't be going out and jamming radios, please. Now, generally when we think of radios, we tend to think of walkie-talkie or a similar sort of thing. But I'm sure everyone in this room has a good number of radios on them right now. So, for example, I have my phone. I'm going to have to juggle some stuff here. Okay, so I have my phone. And it has a Wi-Fi interface, of course, running at 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. It has Bluetooth at 2.4 gigahertz, a cellular interface, so that's 4G and 5G. They use a pretty broad range of frequency bands. I won't go ahead and list them all. And it has a GPS receiver. Now, aside from my phone, my wallet, it has contactless payment cards and my employee ID, and no, I won't be showing you them. These operate on near-field communication at 13.56 megahertz. Now, as well as that, wireless mice and keyboards. Typically, these tend to use Bluetooth, but even when they don't, and when they have like a little dongle that comes with them, they tend to run at 2.4 gigahertz. Now, this one we'll get into in a bit in more detail later, but car keys. Now, this set of keys is remote keyless entry. So this is the idea whereby I click a button on the car key, and the car unlocks or locks. This operates at 433.92 megahertz. But if we're getting a bit fancier, we move into passive keyless entry, and that's this idea that, well, I've got my key in my pocket, I stroll casually up to my car and nod away from the microphone, and pull on the handle, and the car just opens like magic. More on that later. And lastly, car keys also have a transponder built in at 125 kilohertz. This essentially means that, whenever you start your car will look for this transponder nearby. If someone has tried to pick your ignition key slot or drilled it out to try and just flip the switch, they're not going to get very far in your car without the transponder, because the immobilizer will activate. Now, those are some radios that we have on us. But how do we actually send a message with radios? Well, here's a very simple setup. We have a transmitter and an antenna. And if we want to have power radiate from our antenna, we need to send a special kind of wave called a carrier wave. Now, this is a sinusoidal wave. If we just send like a constant, like 5-volt signal, we're not going to get much out of the antenna, so we have to have this time-varying signal. But the thing is, this allows us to radiate power, but there's not much information encoded in this, right? It tells us, okay, the transmitter's on or off. So, to encode information on this carrier wave, we need to go through a process called modulation. So, in modulation, we take our carrier wave, which can excite the antenna, but has not a lot of information, and we take our data, which is our information, and we combine them to create this output waveform on the right, which can excite the antenna and also carries information. So, what does this look like? Or even better, what dials can we turn to modulate our carrier wave? Well, this is the formula for a sinusoid wave, and you'll see I've highlighted 3 values. That is the amplitude, so the maximum value at each cycle, the frequency, which is the number of cycles per second, and the phase, which is essentially the point in the cycle where we start. So, these are 3 quantities that we can vary to change the shape of this wave. So, if we want to vary the amplitude in order to encode some information on this wave, so if I want to say hello, or even better, 01001, arbitrary bit string that I picked, you'll see that we choose 2 different amplitudes. We have a 0, and we have just the carrier wave. Now, fun fact, this amplitude scheme, I've personally seen this used in my own car keys and a set of remotes for Christmas tree lights. Very, very different sort of requirements there, but they use the same modulation scheme. Now, if we want to change the frequency in order to encode some information on our wave, well, you'll see that we've defined 2 different frequencies. We have this lower frequency that looks a bit fatter, and we have this higher frequency that looks a bit more bunched up. So, if we want to send a 0, we send this lower frequency. If we want to send a 1, we transmit this higher frequency. And I found that this scheme is used in weather balloon radio sondes for transmitting data to ground stations. Lastly, phase shift keying. So you'll see that if we want to send a 0, we just send a copy of the carrier wave. But if we want to send a 1, we send that shifted by 180 degrees. So anywhere there's a peak, there's a trough. Anywhere there is a trough, there's a peak. You'll also see that at any transition from a 0 to a 1, or a 1 to a 0, there are these really sharp, sudden changes in the wave. So for a really simple demodulator, you might just look for these sudden transitions. And a variant of phase shift keying, or PSK, is used in GSM communications. That's 2G. Now, why do we actually need to be able to tell different modulation schemes apart? Well, if you're trying to interpret a signal for yourself and you receive something like this, you need to be able to look at it and say, well, okay, I'm seeing the carrier wave and then nothing, carrier wave, nothing, on, off, on, off. There's no real change in the frequency and there's no apparent change in the phase. So if I'm using software like Universal Radio Hacker, I need to be able to select, okay, amplitude shift keying, to get this demodulated waveform and then the bit string out of it, and that was the original information that was transmitted. Now, you might be happy to hear that that's about the most radio security we'll be looking at for now. So let's move on to actual security. So, oldest trick in the book, the replay attack. So we have our innocent user, Bob, as his friends call him, and he has a key for his garage door opener. He presses open on the garage door opener, his garage opens. Pretty simple story. Except we introduce an attacker who has a bit of radio equipment that can listen into this transmission. So Bob presses open on his key, the garage door hears this, it opens, but the attacker also hears this. And this is something to keep in mind, that generally, unless you're specifically trying to avoid it with high gain antennas or with beamforming, generally if you broadcast a transmission like this, even from your car keys, that's going to go in quite some wide angle around you. Like that could go 360 degrees around you. So our attacker can pick this up even though it wasn't originally intended for him, and he can go ahead and replay this later when Bob goes to bed. And that garage door will open if there's no replay protection. So here's a comparison of some hardware that we can use for these sorts of attacks. So obviously we can't talk about radio hacking in 2024 without talking about the Flipper Zero. So at £165, that seems a bit steep at first, but radio equipment of this sort generally tends to cost a little bit more than I'd like. Now, it's sort of described as like the Swiss Army knife of physical radio hacking. We're interested in the sub 1 gigahertz module in this piece of kit, but it also has a bunch of different interfaces like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, NFC. So it's a pretty good all-round tool to have. Now, the device that I used for my demos in this talk is the HackRF1, which is a software-defined radio, or SDR. Now, it's a bit more expensive at £220, but it's a lot more flexible within its frequency range. So if you can think up a signal in something like GNU Radio, and it's within the right frequency range, this can probably transmit it, no problem. And thankfully, I didn't have to buy this. This was lent to me by my buddy Grant. I'll shout him out at the end. But before he handed that to me, I was trying to put together this DIY arts and crafts looking radio here. So I looked at the Flipper Zero, and I thought, well, that's a bit expensive. What is the sub 1 gigahertz module in that? I found it was the Texas Instruments CC1101, so I just ordered a module of my own, put it on a breadboard, hooked it up to an Arduino, and tried to write some code for that. Now, that seemed fine at first, but I ended up near bashing my head off a wall trying to actually get it to replay a signal exactly, because it's not a software-defined radio. It can only transmit in certain ways. So if I wasn't given this SDR, I probably would still be playing about with this thing, but at £30, I can't really complain. Now, when I was looking at tools for this talk, I did come across something that's maybe not so practical, but I knew I absolutely had to mention it. Here's the hottest new radio hacking tool from Mattel, the Girltech I Am Me. Now, this is an instant messaging toy for children and radio hackers, and it contains the Texas Instruments CC1110 sub 1 gigahertz microcontroller, so very similar to the one in the Flipper Zero, just a bit older. So, people like Sami Kamkar, and more on him later, found that it's pretty straightforward to upload custom firmware to this. So, he has a demonstration on his website of using this to open a garage door opener. And some other researchers also found that they could use this to jam P25, or secure, radios. So, it's a very scary toy. Very purple. Okay, so back to business. I was sitting at Farset Labs over at Weaver's Court, and I was looking about thinking, well, what can I interact with my radios to prove my point here? And I saw this. It's a projector screen that has a motor attached to it. And this projector screen motor has a remote controller that works on 433.92 megahertz, just the same frequency band that my car keys work on, in fact. So, here's the unit that interacts with. Here's the HackRF1 that I used to record a signal. And I thought I would be this guy for today. So I click the down button, I click the up button on the remotes next to my HackRF1 while I'm recording the signal, and the signal that I get looks something like this. And if you think back to our chat about modulation, you'll see that we have nothing, carrier wave, nothing, carrier wave, so on and so forth, with no real change in frequency and no real sudden change in phase. So, it would be a reasonable guess to say that this is amplitude shift keying. But in a replay attack, we don't even need to analyze this waveform. We don't need to know anything about it. All I had to do was press replay. And this is what happened when I did that. Yeah, so the projector screen started rolling up. So I've used about £220 worth of equipment to, defeat a £20 remote control that probably didn't have security in mind to begin with. So I got to thinking, where do I go from here? What's the sort of harder target that maybe security is sort of important for? And then it hit me. My car. Well, it didn't actually hit me. The idea hit me to try and break into it. And you'll find that if you try and repeat that replay attack while standing right next to a car, you listen to the signal from your keys and you replay that, nothing happens. And this is because cars use a bit of replay protection called rolling code. Now, bear with me. In rolling code, the key and the car both track a counter. And I'll get my car keys out just to sort of have something tactile to click. So, whenever you press a key or button on your car key, that'll send a message with that command, lock or unlock, but it also will include a cryptographically encoded function of that counter. So the car receives this message. The message, of course, has the command and the cryptographic function of this counter. And the car will compare this to its own counter. If the counter in the key matches the counter in the car, happy days, the car will unlock. In fact, if the counter in the key is a little bit ahead of the car, it'll still unlock. But if the counter in the key is behind the counter in the car will just completely ignore the command and refuse to unlock. Yes, so anytime you press the key, the counter in the key will increment, and anytime the car receives a valid key press, it will synchronize its counter with the counter in the key. So what does this mean for our attack? Well, it means that whenever Bob presses unlock on his key, the car receives a message containing a function of 1, so that function of 1 is what we're calling the rolling code, and we also receive the same message which contains a function of 1. The car is expecting this value, so it unlocks. But if we try and replay that same message later, well, the car is expecting a function of 2 or 3 or 4 or something, and we only have that function of 1. And because of the encoding of the encoding of the counter, it's very hard to predict what the next encoded value will be. So we're sort of out of luck if we want to try and attack this. Or are we? Well, I mentioned Sammy Kamkar earlier, and he came up with this attack called RollJam. So you'll see in the top right, that's his hardware he put together. In the bottom right, that's another design by Spencer White. But you'll see that there are 2 antennas. One of these jams the car's radio receiver, and the other carries out a replay attack. Now, I'd also want to mention Sammy Kamkar is also known for a very popular MySpace forum and a lot of work on drone hacking. So this is very much in character for him. But here's how this attack works in some detail. So, Bob will click unlock on his car key, but we're jamming the receiver of the car. So we'll receive message 1, and the car won't hear anything. Bob sees that, well, his car's not unlocked, so he'll do the very natural thing and press the unlock button again. We're still jamming the car. So now we've stored message 2 and message 1. We have 2 valid messages, and we very quickly stop jamming the car, and we replay the older of the 2, leaving us with 1 valid message. So we can go on and do this like a near infinite amount of times, until eventually we have messages n and n-1. Bob decides it's time to go to bed, or go to work, or leave his car. We've transmitted n-1 to lock his car for him very kindly. And then he leaves, and we transmit message n, the most recent message, and the car unlocks. So, I really wanted to try and demo this attack, but unfortunately, I mentioned Ofcom earlier, and apparently they really don't take kindly to you trying to jam radio frequencies. So, I decided to try something a bit different. This is the remote keyless entry relay attack. So, we have 2 attackers. One is near Bob, and one is near Bob's car. Bob and the attacker are very far away from the car. So the attacker next to Bob, at some point receives a unlock message from Bob's key, either by very quickly, momentarily stealing it and covertly receiving that, or waiting for Bob to play about with his keys. I don't know, maybe people do that. And the attacker next to Bob, after receiving this, transmits that message to his accomplice. And I mean, I use the graphic of a satellite here, but realistically this is probably an email or something. And the accomplice replays this attack, this message, to the car. And because the car hasn't heard this one before, it will unlock. So here's a quick demo of me emulating that. So the first step, I recorded the unlock signal from my car key while pretty far away from my car. I then traveled to my car some distance away. And this is to emulate, sending the message to an accomplice. And then I replayed the signal next to my car. So here's me, here's the Hack RF1, laptop in hand, and I'm about to press replay. And you'll see that the car unlocks. So that's nice. But I have to ask myself, is this a realistic attack for a criminal, for someone who, means some harm or some personal gain? Well, I reckon, if you're an opportunistic thief, and you're walking past a car, and you see a laptop or a watch in the passenger seat that you really want, are you, A, going to run home, go on the internet and buy £200 worth of radio equipment, run back, try and find the owner of the car, and carry out this really convoluted attack? Or are you, B, going to grab the nearest brick and put it through the window to smash and grab whatever you can? Because I think it's going to be option B. I'm not saying that this isn't going to happen for some motivations, but for the motivation of petty theft, criminal damage is probably a lot more convenient. Now, for a car thief trying to steal the car itself, yes, some of these thieves are motivated by selling the car for its value, but a lot of them are looking to chop the car for parts. So, yes, being able to just open the door is very nice, but even once the thief is in the car, they're still going to have to find a way of starting the engine and getting past the immobilizer. So with all the other hurdles, I don't know if they're going to try and stalk someone to carry out this attack. With remote keyless entry. Passive keyless entry, that's another kettle of fish we'll get into in a minute. So the only real sort of criminal I can think of that would ever benefit from this would be a stalker of some description leaving a tracker inside of a car. But even then, I imagine there are plenty of places outside of a car that this would work for. So I don't know if this is the most dangerous exploit of all time. But definitely do make your own mind up on this one. So I might not be convinced about the practicality of this attack, but an attack which I am convinced about, and have seen a lot of CCTV footage of this attack happening, is an attack on keyless entry and keyless start. So, how this is supposed to work is Bob has his keys in his pocket. So Bob's got a nice new car with passive keyless entry. He walks up to his car, he pulls on the door handle, and the car issues a challenge. Bob's key hears this challenge, calculates a response, sends that response to the car, and the car then unlocks if that response is correct. So this exchange could be very cryptographically secure, but that actually doesn't matter too much because of one fatal flaw, one fatal assumption, and that is that the distance this can occur at is limited because the key's transmit power is low and the car's transmit power is low. So it's a bit like saying that if someone was up on stage with me and whispered something into my ear, you in the audience would have a very hard time hearing it. Unless I was to start yelling that out at the top of my lungs, repeating what they'd said. This is the two-thief attack. So Bob has put his car in his driveway, and he's gone to bed for the night. These two thieves, Attacker 1 and Attacker 2, show up on the scene. Attacker 1 is next to Bob's car, and Attacker 2 is next to Bob's house where the key is located. And both of these attackers have radio equipment which is capable of receiving the required signals and replaying an amplified version. So, Attacker 1 pulls on the door handle. The car then transmits the challenge message quietly, low power. Attacker 1 receives this, and then replays it at an extremely high power, yelling it very loudly into the air. Attacker 2 receives this, and replays it to the key. The key receives what it thinks is a normal challenge, calculates the response, and sends it back out into the air. Attacker 2 receives this, and replays the amplified version, which is picked up by Attacker 1, who then passes it on to the car again. So the car has had the user pull the door handle, it's issued its challenge, and it's received a response. So it does the only natural thing, and it unlocks. Attacker 1 then presses the ignition button on the car. This exchange repeats, and Attacker 1 is away. And again, keep in mind, this is possible because the assumption in this exchange is that the distance is limited because the power is limited. So that doesn't seem very good. So how can we mitigate this attack? Well, here's a graphic put out by the PSNI, telling owners of cars what they can do to try and reduce the risk of their car being stolen like this. Now, generally, I like this advice. I have no issue with the advice itself, but I think it's unfortunate that some of this advice has to be said in the first place. So, when you have advice like, put the device in a signal blocking pouch, such as a Faraday bag, and turn off wireless signals on your key fob when it's not being used, I think that's interesting, because if you compared that to a phone, if you, bought the newest Fruit-branded smartphone tomorrow, you brought it home and you unboxed it, you're very happy with it, and then you look online and you see a graphic from your local police service that tells you, oh, by the way, turn off all wireless communications on this device when it's not being used because it's really insecure and could leak your information. You might return the phone the next day. So, I don't know, I think something's gone wrong here. Now, as I said, I don't like complaining without proposing a solution, so here are some of the solutions that have been proposed by others. For one, encode timestamps in these exchanges. So, radio waves in a vacuum propagate at the speed of light, 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. If I have a securely encoded timestamp in all of my transmissions, let's say from the perspective of the car, it receives a message that says it was sent at 10 a.m. and 0 seconds. But this has been received at 10 a.m. and 45 seconds, and the maximum effective range for this protocol should be about 5 meters. Well, something's gone very wrong. Either someone's jamming and delaying your signal, or something's gone awry with the laws of physics. Either way, probably a good idea to keep the door locked. Okay, researchers have suggested the use of machine learning techniques for fingerprinting signals in order to differentiate between a legitimate key and a different piece of equipment being used to repeat the signal from that key. And lastly, it's been suggested that we should use physical metrics like the received signal strength, round time trip, or even GPS coordinates to identify proximity. Now, I understand, there's no free lunch, so with, unless you're at BSides Belfast, but with the use of encoded timestamps, there is a challenge there in synchronizing the timing in the key and the car. And this is all a trade-off between security, price, and convenience, and that the line has to be drawn somewhere. So, I do understand why things are the way they are. Now, what are the takeaways? Why am I up here talking to you? Well, keep in mind, when you broadcast a message from a wireless device, you generally can't control who receives it, unless you're using like a high gain, focused antenna, or you're using beamforming. You can generally only control who gets to read it using cryptography. Secondly, I'd like you to have a think. Do we need to have higher expectations regarding wireless and hardware security testing, or do we need to have more of a focus on specific job roles or disciplines that just test for these sorts of attacks? Because I genuinely don't have answers for that. I would love to chat to you about it later, maybe at the after party. And if you're an interested beginner in this area, check out a course from check out the Foundation Amateur Radio. I'm tripping over my words. No, check out a course for the Foundation Amateur Radio license, possibly from the Radio Society of Great Britain. Honestly, the theory on the foundation exam is really, really helpful, and it'll also help you stay out of trouble. Oh yeah, so before I wrap up, some other topics I wanted to bring up but didn't really have time for. Wireless keyboards. Is yours encrypted? Wireless mice. Can someone pair a fake wireless keyboard with your mouse dongle? Maybe. Radio access networks. That's a whole other topic with things like false base stations and various eavesdropping attacks, piecing information back together, and key exchanges. But I'll leave that for another time. So, thank you very much, and a special shout out to Grant Brins for lending me his Hack RF1, my dad for filming me break into my car, Forset Labs for letting me play with their projector screen, and Sammy Camcar for inspiring this talk. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, by any chance?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, are there any questions?
Yes, so you're asking how does rolling code, and I'll just pull that diagram back up. How does rolling code work if we have two keys and one car? I'm going to be completely honest. I don't actually know how that works with two keys and one car. I assume there would have to be some sort of way of synchronizing between the keys, but I don't have a solid answer for you, sorry. Okay. Yes. No, I didn't play about with the transponder for this talk, but that's definitely something that's on my list. But then again, I also don't want to accidentally mess up my car's immobilizer, but, in the name of science, I might do it. Oh, yes?
Question. You mentioned that when you submit the command, it adds an extra stack, so n+1.
Mm-hmm.
And that the car won't accept it if the key is behind. So if like calling the attack key with the original key.
Yes, so if the car has received that valid message, let's see. So if the car receives a valid message, its counter will move on, and I'm having trouble thinking this through in my head right now, but I think your key's counter, because you've clicked the button on the key, it will still have incremented. So when that attack is carried out, it might still be in sync at the end of it. But even if it is not in sync at the end of it, you can still click your key a couple of times to increment that counter a bit up until the point where the car will accept it, I think. Just don't blame me if you break your car. Yes?
Did you work out how car key knows the car? Some cars, when you bring the car, the same car key and the car knows its own network.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure what protocol that uses, but I imagine that is working on the 125 kilohertz band, similar to the transponder. It probably uses a similar technology, but I'm not sure. It might use, it could be working on the same sort of idea as the passive keyless entry, where it's like a challenge response, but I would have to look that up. Okay. Yes.
Why interact units at speed of light, not speed of sound?
Sorry, did I say, if I said speed of sound, I meant speed of light. Are you asking why is it the speed of light? Because it's an electromagnetic wave. Light is an electromagnetic wave. Radio waves are electromagnetic waves, so they move at a same speed. I think I'm not so good at my physics.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.